A couple of years ago, Try did an incredible deep dive video on playing games on projectors. This episode served as a good primer for those who might be interested in getting into them, but it also documented a lot of the nuances, benefits, downfalls, and challenges of what it takes to get games running on an ultra big screen. After wrapping, he sent me the InFocus Screenplay 7205 projector from 2004 that he covered in that video, since he had little use for it. I'd never used one myself, so this was a great opportunity to see if there was a way to incorporate it into my gaming setup in some way, or heck, if I'd even like using it. Which I did, but using a projector of this age did come with some compromises. So I eventually found myself just using it to play games or watch movies outside, projected on the side of the house. During the summer of 2023, I scored a nice pull-down projector screen at a yard sale for $5. And once again, the gear started turning in my mind. The timing on this was serendipitous because a couple of days later, we got an email from BenQ, who had been happy with the coverage of one of their mid-range 4K projectors from 2021. And they wondered if we'd be interested in checking out their new X3100i 4K gaming projector. Yeah, of course I would. So let's see what a newer projector has to offer and whether or not it works better in my gaming setup. During the height of my friends and I's obsession with Street Fighter II, we used to constantly discuss how cool it would be to play the game on a movie theater screen. I don't know how that would have worked in 1993, but it didn't matter, because this was an unattainable fantasy anyways. 30 years on, the X3100i from BenQ delivers on that one-time fantasy of a Street Fighter-obsessed teenager. This is their flagship gaming projector for 2023, touting ultra-low lag, HDR, and 4K output. These features and many others don't come cheap though. Clocking in at around $2,400, this is up quite a bit from the mid-range TK700 STI that Try covered in his video back in 2021. That price might make you throw up your hands, nope out, and move on. Totally understandable. But then again, projectors have never been cheap, especially good ones. Before we move forward, I encourage you, no, I implore you to go check out Try's video on projectors from 2021, because there's a ton of overarching aspects that I'm going to reference in this video, but I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it. Besides, I simply do not have enough equipment on hand to make comparisons on that level. One of the reasons that video works so well is because he was able to cover such a wide variety of projectors. Instead, I'm going to focus on the specific settings of this projector and how well it works with different systems and scalars in my setup. Thanks to this projector being 4K and with the help of a trusty HDMI splitter, I can hook the X3100i into my main setup and play games without any compromises. In the box, you've got the projector, a streaming dongle, power cable, remote, and of course the documentation. Let me tell you, this is one hefty piece of equipment. I knew it was going to be big based on the photos that I saw of it, but this thing weighs like 15 pounds. If you're hanging it from the ceiling like I am, be careful, and you'll probably want to put one of those safety cables around it. The side of the unit has some buttons and a directional pad to access and navigate an on-screen menu. The physical lens, zoom, and focus dials are also there for general adjustments. Depending on where you plan to set up the projector, adjustable feet will help you angle it upwards with a dial on top that lets you adjust the vertical angle of the lens to help you get things exactly where you want them. If the angle needs to be refined further, 2D keystoning is possible via the menu once you turn it on. However, doing so will result in additional input lag since it's digital manipulation. While I was surprised that it wasn't built in, having to unscrew and remove the top to insert the Android OS-based streaming dongle was pretty simple and was a one-and-done process. The back of the unit has two HDMI 2.0 inputs, one of which is audio return capable. But yeah, I did say HDMI 2.0, not 2.1. so VRR and 4K 120 are out of reach here. Heck, I'm not even sure if the tech is even there with projectors to achieve this anyway. Rounding out the ports on the back are a 3.5mm and Toslink ports for external audio output, a serial I/O for remote control, and a USB port. As you'd expect, there aren't any analog inputs here. The built-in Trevolo speakers sound pretty nice for what they are, although I do wish I could output audio through the built-in speakers and an external device simultaneously. So, that USB port. It's used for updating firmware and loading in game-specific profiles through a feature called Settings Exchange. You'd assume that you could just copy the firmware file or Settings Exchange profiles over to a USB flash drive and just load them in that way. But nope, you actually have to connect a PC or laptop to the projector directly, download an app, and do it through that. That is totally annoying. I mean, why can't this just be done using an app on the Android dongle? The likely reason for the X3100i's additional chonk probably comes down to it being a 4 LED projector. This means that it uses LED lamps, red, green, blue, and an additional color, versus the more traditional bulb lamps seen in other projectors. This method supposedly results in more vivid colors, but they also last a whole lot longer too, something like 10 to 15 times longer, or 20 to 30,000 hours. I think this is pretty important when considering the cost of the projector versus what you might have to put into a cheaper projector to keep it working with expensive lamp replacements. It starts to even out over time. Or heck, it might even start to become cheaper in the long run. Despite using the 4 LEDs, this is still a DLP projector at heart, and is thus subject to the inherent quirks of the technology. In particular, if you dart your eyes around the screen a whole bunch, you might see some color separation. I didn't particularly notice this with my own eyes, but susceptibility does vary from person to person. The X3100i is a 4K projector, but uses pixel shifting to construct its 4K video projection. So don't go in expecting an image as crisp as a native 4K monitor or TV. However, I noticed that pixel art doesn't seem to suffer at all from the slightly softer image either, which bodes well for playing games using a 4K upscaler, which we'll talk about later. You know, having spent a lot of time playing on OLED screens over the last several years, I was initially disappointed by the softer image and overall black levels with this projector. It's just nowhere near as good as what I was used to. That is, until everything clicked into place late one night when I was playing Super Mario RPG. I realized that, like playing games on a CRT versus an HD TV, this too has its own unique character, from the enormous size to the texture and slight chromatic aberration that only a lens can give. A sense of spectacle began to creep in that wasn't too unlike what I felt going to the movie theater as a kid. Alright, now that you have an idea of how the X3100i works, let's get to playing some games. I mounted the projector and screen around the corner from my normal game setup and studio. The pull-down screen I bought at a yard sale measures around 90 inches corner to corner, and there is about 9 feet between it and the projector. What I didn't even realize till I got everything set up is that if you pull it all the way down, it's a 4:3 aspect ratio. At this distance, I can zoom the lens all the way out, and 4:3 content just about perfectly fills the entire screen. This is especially good for PC games that support this aspect ratio, but also for classic games. I mean, look at this. John Morris in Castlevania Bloodlines is bigger than my hand. It's awe-inspiring, because this is the sort of thing that I dreamed about as a kid, you know? After booting up the projector for the first time, and going through the whole rigmarole of setting everything up, you can pretty much get right into playing. Being a gaming projector, input lag is of utmost importance. BenQ specifies around 16 milliseconds of lag when displaying at 1080p 60 or 4K 60. Using my trusty time sleuth, I can see that this does appear to be right on point. Although limitations of the time sleuth do prevent me from going to a higher resolution, I don't see any reason to think that 4K 60 would be any different. 720p and 480p did show to be a bit laggier though. and weren't improved by the projector's built-in 4K upscaling feature. Let's have a chat about that internal upscaling feature while we're here. How does that upscaling look? What even is it? Well, on the TK700 that Tri looked at back in 2021, this was referred to as fast mode, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because turning it on simply displays the resolution that the projector is getting from the source, while turning it off upscaled everything to 4K, even 1080p content. Reformatting this option to be called 4K upscaling is way easier to understand, and the values make sense now. 4K upscaling on or off? What do you want to do? Content upscaled to 4K didn't exhibit any change in input lag, but with 1080p content, we see the input at its native resolution, and it looks simply incredible. Not only is it much sharper, but the little pixel bubbles that the image is made up of is just so aesthetically pleasing that it'll improve your entire day. On that note, if your feeling of this sort of 1080p aesthetic might be your jam too, then check it out. 1080p at 120 frames per second is entirely possible with games that support this mode. Heck, even input lag is lowered to around 8 milliseconds in this mode. Now, I'd never felt particularly swayed by the higher frame rate, and given the choice of 4K 60 versus 1080p 120 on my LG OLED C8, I'd go with 4K 60 every single time. However, whenever I'm playing on this projector, I can see myself going 1080p 120 FPS every single time if it's an option, because of how the X3100i looks at 1080p. Weird how that works, right? Let's sidestep from here over to color. Not just the different color profile modes, most of which remain equivalent to the previous BenQ that Tri looked at, but also HDR. The projector has the ability to output up to 3,300 lumens of light, which is plenty to fill your dark soul with light, but also light up the darkest of basements. HDR in this projector will set a room awash in light, and it's pretty impressive. Look at Vector Sector on Digital Eclipse's Atari 50th anniversary celebration. This game combines a number of vector-based games into one amazing journey. Although it doesn't natively support HDR, this is one of the few times where I prefer to use the PlayStation 5's HDR All the Things setting. The immense size, look, and bright colors really make you feel like you're being pulled into the game. This is one of, if not the best experience I'd had with the projector up to that point. But games like Final Fantasy XVI, Spider-Man 2, and more that support HDR natively are just as impressive. The Game and Picture Settings menu will help you calibrate your image as you see fit. The different picture modes, RPG, FPS, SPG, RCG, and Cinema, are all presets, although each can be individually tweaked from here to your preference. For instance, I made sure to set the sharpness of each profile to neutral sharpness, which is 0. Now, Tri noted that the neutral sharpness was around 25 for some reason on the TK700. It might seem that there's a lot less options here, but I'm starting to notice a trend of things being easier to understand, with some extraneous options that just make things worse being removed, and I don't see a problem with that. I found myself preferring RPG mode for its more vibrant and natural looking colors. Thankfully, the picture mode settings seems to be retained separately between HDR mode and SDR mode, so you have a bit more freedom here. More granular settings are present within the Advanced Color Settings menu, which also includes HDR brightness levels. Auto Game Mode will change profiles from console to console if you wish. Different lamp brightness modes are available in the display settings. Eco delivers a less colorful and dimmer image, but results in longer LED life, while Dynamic will switch brightness from scene to scene. Normal maintains the same brightness at all times for optimal presentation. Interestingly, in games or system when HDR is present, you have a couple additional picture modes available with the abbreviation WCG on them. This stands for Wide Color Gamut, and enabling a profile will turn on a filter which helps cover 100% of the DCI P3 color space. Now, this isn't something that I know much about, but in practice, you'll notice that the colors are a little bit warmer and the overall look isn't quite as bright. Anyway, when you have the settings just the way you like them, You can then back them up to your PC using the Settings Exchange app. Or you can download and replace any of the picture modes with pre-made profiles. You might want to replace the user setting for safety. I like the intent behind this, but as I said earlier, having to connect and transfer from a PC is just too cumbersome to be useful if you play a bunch of games. It'd be so much easier if you could just store them all on a flash drive and load them as desired. After struggling for a couple months with getting 3D content working with the Viture XR glasses, I didn't have much faith in the X3100i's 3D feature either. But to my surprise, it was very simple to use as long as I had the correct DLP 3D 144Hz active shutter glasses. And hey, if you have a 3D capable Blu-ray player, it'll work on movies too. Alright then, let's talk about classic games. This projector supports a wide variety of resolutions, which is good, but keep in mind the additional lag that comes with sub 1080p resolutions. PixelFX HDMI mods, analog consoles, and the Mr. FPGA are all capable of 1080p output, and again, this really drives home just how nice sharp pixels look on the projector at 1080p. But I'll admit, getting this projector for review and the imminent release of 4K gaming upscalers had me really excited. With the RetroTink 4K in hand, I was curious to see how well it worked with the projector with analog consoles, but also if the CRT masks and scanline filters would translate relatively faithfully despite the pixel shifting. The extra resolution that 4K allows for is what really helps sell the authentic CRT look. Would it look good enough to feel like a 90-inch CRT? But first, since this projector supports 1080p 120, we can activate the black frame insertion or BFI option on the Tink 4K. This mode inserts black in between each frame to offer increased motion clarity at the cost of decreased brightness. However, the Tink 4K does offer HDR injection, which can be used to brighten the image to offset this. Black frame insertion is just one of those things that doesn't do much for me in particular, but for others, like Try, they love it. However, I could be interested in running the Tink at 120 FPS mode just for the benefit of reduced input lag. Now then, how about those CRT masks and scanline effects? To be honest, I was going in expecting the worst. Some of these presets do in fact look authentic enough to pass for a 90-inch CRT, but a lot of the nuances of the subpixels are definitely lost due to the pixel shifting that the projector does to get things to 4K. I'm sure there was a time when playing classic games on a projector was an absolute non-starter, but with all the options there are to emulate and upscale 20-plus-year-old games and hardware to 1080p and beyond, combined with the low input lag of a gaming projector like this, means that it's a totally viable endeavor now. The BenQ X3100i is a robust projector that offers great compatibility and has the features to back it up. It does come at a cost though, but the lifespan of the LED lamps helps to justify the $2,400 asking price. Although the lack of future-proofing that including HDMI 2.1 ports would have ensured might be a deal breaker for anyone who's already heavily integrated that into their setup. And that doesn't even take into account what is needed to get a good projector experience in the first place, from needing a pull-down screen or a blank wall space that's big enough, or just flat out having the space to set it up. This isn't a trivial situation that you can just jump into without any prep. It requires effort, perhaps more than you might be prepared to put in. But I'll tell you, once I got it all set up and running, oh boy, I'll admit that this whole experience of gaming on a projector played out pretty differently than I initially expected. Sure, maybe the black levels aren't as deep or the image as crisp as playing on my OLED, but the spectacle of playing on a screen so gigantic handily alleviated the negatives for me. I'm really taken with the look and feel of playing games in this way. And for better or worse, it's something that I'm probably going to be putting a lot more time and effort into optimizing.